Hello everyone watching, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. I'm Bird's Eye View Politics, and I make videos about politics, I guess, and I take a bird's eye view look at things. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down why the Republican primary for 2024 will probably be very, very, very chaotic. So, let's start with the recent news from Florida that Trump recently lost a poll against Ron DeSantis. Now, Ron DeSantis is someone who is essentially Trump-light. In the Republican Party, there is supposed to be at least three main groups. There is the never-Trumpers, like Liz Cheney. There's your Trump-light, like Ron DeSantis, who are on board with Trump, but not all the way. And then your Trump-heavy, or your Trump-max, your Marjorie Taylor Greenes. Trump himself, obviously, is part of that category. Matt Gaetz, Josh Hawley in the Senate. And Ron DeSantis is winning polls in head-to-head matchups. So, when did this happen? Why did this happen? What does it mean for 2024? Well, essentially, Ron DeSantis has been increasing ever since he began his culture wars with the Democrats in Florida, particularly surrounding schooling, and he made himself very, very popular among Republicans. And while Trump was probably the only reason DeSantis ever became governor, DeSantis has now begun to carve out his own path in the GOP. Now, if we look back at 2016, according to polls and just general knowledge, Trump was never, ever, in any point, a majority candidate. Now, sure, while in advance of the primaries in Iowa, Trump was already polling roughly, 30%. By March-ish, he had solidified himself as the frontrunner ahead of course, Iowa. However, Trump never actually got to 50%, even when Marco Rubio, who at the time was in third place, pulled out of the race. He still didn't crack 50%, even with all the momentum of winning another candidate, one of the only major candidates left in the race. Even when winning his home state, he still failed. He almost won Texas and Ohio, Cruz and Kasich's home state, but he still never cracked 50, even when, after winning the Indiana primary in a landslide fashion with Mike Pence endorsing Ted Cruz, even after that, when Trump had so much momentum and it was basically obvious Trump was going to win the primary, even then, Trump only managed 47-ish%. Now, you can make the argument that Trump has become more popular in the GOP, and I think he has, but he's never had that completely solidified support. He just has a very large base, which showed when all through the scandals he was consistently polling through the main stretch of the primaries at roughly 30 points, which is significantly higher than any of the other GOP candidates. And if you look at the map as well, Trump isn't going to do as solidly in certain regions as he did previously. If we remember, Trump didn't even get 50% of the popular vote, even when you consider that some extremely large and populous states like California voted after all the other candidates had dropped out, meaning Trump would win 70%, 66%, 70% again of the votes in big states, winning huge vote totals. And these just essentially still failed to put Trump above the 50%. Another thing we forget is that the Republican convention was almost contested. If, of course, Indiana hadn't gone to Trump as was essentially expected, you could have seen many more competitive primaries. Maybe California went to Cruz, maybe Oregon went to Kasich, Washington. There's many, many states that could have gone different ways in the primary if Trump hadn't won Indiana, and you could potentially be seeing the Republican Party of Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio or John Kasich. Now, if you look at the results, you see there was a lot of candidates, and that was always going to help Trump. Because by the time we got to Iowa and New Hampshire, the first two states to vote in the primaries, we had already seen that essentially Trump was going to be the lead candidate. Now, we didn't know if Kasich would come second or Cruz would come second. Cruz was widely thought to be second, and indeed he did finish second. But people still thought maybe Ben Carson could come second. Maybe Jeb Bush could turn his campaign around. Chris Christie, with good debate performances, could have, done better. And that didn't happen. But Trump was always going to benefit from divided primaries because, especially in Republican states, you don't have to win the majority of the vote in order to take all the delegates. For example, look at South Carolina. Trump won 33% of the vote and got 100% of the delegates. That is something that doesn't, at least for most Democratic states in their primaries, occur. In Republican primaries, it's much more of a winner-take-all concept. Now, of course, this did help some Trump opponents, such as John Kasich, where Kasich won only 47% of the vote and won a whopping 66 delegates, which is quite a lot for one state. But it definitely helped Trump secure this idea that he was the inevitable frontrunner who couldn't possibly lose. I mean, just look at this. He tied Cruz in Missouri, basically tied 41 to 41, only had roughly 2,000 more votes, and yet he got more than double the delegates. A divided primary where it was Trump versus a bunch of anti-Trumpers was always going to help Trump. And that's how it is now. But if you look at primaries, at least for the polling, when DeSantis versus Trump and there's other candidates on the ballot, Trump destroys DeSantis. Trump pulls in consistently roughly 50%. DeSantis is consistently roughly 20 to 30%. If you look at any poll, it just depends on how many options there are. If Liz Cheney's on there, that's a few less DeSantis. If Nikki Haley's on there, a few less DeSantis. Pence is on there, a few less DeSantis. There's no one really competing with Trump for the Trump Max lane in the primary. However, what I explored was I looked at, well, who are the potential candidates? And this is all the candidates who are potential candidates, at least. In the Republican primary, you have candidates like Marjorie Taylor Greene who have said, yeah, I'm willing to run for president and I'd be honored to be Trump's vice president. You have Josh Hawley, who's clearly making moves to be a presidential candidate. You have Mike Pence. Ted Cruz has already said he wants to be president again. Marco Rubio, there's been noise that he may say something. Nikki Haley was thought of as a potential president even before Trump came around. Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Larry Hogan, they all anti-Trumpers. They're trying to take back their party and probably losing the battle for that. The long story short is there's a lot of candidates, and it's very easy to see a scenario where Iowa, which wasn't even won by Trump in 2016, ends up giving many of its delegates to Trump because, quite simply, he can win 35% of the vote. He only needs that much in order to get roughly half the delegates. If you win even 30% of the vote, you can win enough. If you win more than 50% of the vote in Texas, for example, you win all the delegates. If you win roughly 50% of the vote in certain states like Florida, if you win just any majority of the vote in Ohio, these are big states and they will help Trump. However, the chaos is going to come when candidates start doing what they did previously. Now, before Ronald Reagan ended up losing the primaries in 1976 versus Gerald Ford, candidates frequently would run in just one state or two states and would try and get themselves some role, such as a cabinet position or some influence over the policy of the campaign. And I think you could see that again. I think you could potentially see a scenario where Liz Cheney runs in maybe the Northwest, in the more conservative areas, and Adam Kinzinger runs in the Midwest, Larry Hogan in the East, and they don't run against each other. I don't think Adam Kinzinger, if he runs for president, he's given some thought to it at least publicly. I don't think he's running against Liz Cheney in Wyoming, and I don't think Liz Cheney, who has already been thought of as a likely presidential candidate, is going to run against Adam Kinzinger in Illinois. If you look at other states like New Jersey, I don't think that you see potentially one of like Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger running against Chris Christie, who's actually criticized Trump for events January 6th. I still think that this could potentially be the year where the primary system essentially falls apart in 2024, when you have essentially too many candidates on the ballot. As once again, while you may see some vote splitting, I think they've learned from 2016. In 2016, towards the end of the campaign, right before, of course, many candidates dropped out, towards Indiana, you had essentially strategic voting. You had, in states like Ohio, you had people like Marco Rubio tell their supporters to back another candidate. Rubio ended up only getting 2%, but his support, likely roughly 5 to 10% of the electorate, ended up voting for Kasich and probably winning Kasich his home state, not only keeping him in the race, but also making sure Trump got 0 delegates. I think in this potential system, you have people like Adam Kinzinger simply not even running at all, not even telling their people, supporters to vote for someone else. I think you just simply vote for them. And I think that essentially tells you everything you need to know about how the primary is going to go. It's going to be Trump versus some other Republican MAGA-like candidates, and maybe one anti-Trump candidate. But the anti-Trump candidate might not always be Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger or Larry Hogan. It could be Larry Hogan in Maryland. It could be Liz Cheney in Montana. It could be Adam Kinzinger in Texas. You don't know. And I think that's the thing most people are missing out, is you don't know. Now, of course, the polls are usually supposed to be out of 100%, so in many of these, you'll see roughly 90% of voters supposedly made up their minds. For example, in this Trump-DeSantis-Pence matchup, you have 55% for Trump, 30%-ish for DeSantis, 10% for Pence. That's 95%. That's nearly 100%. But I think that it's very clear that, based on this other polling right here with many more candidates, minds have not been made up, even when you look at Trump. So that's my take on this. I think that you could see many, many, many different candidates, different battles just between different states that may essentially cause the entire primary system to collapse. I think the anti-Trumpers have learned from 2016, and I think that Trump himself and the Trump to the max, I guess, it's wing of the party, has learned from 2020. So yeah, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment telling me what you think.